Good afternoon and welcome to the PBSL's latest forum. We're very lucky today to be joined by Barbara Greff, who will be talking to us about the benefits of learning a foreign language and integrating yourself into overseas cultures and the benefit that can have on you as a leader in general. Barbara will be giving a presentation. She's based in Salzburg. She's a linguist and international cultural expert. She studied 7 languages and has a PhD in applied linguistics. And amongst all the other things she does, she teaches senior executives foreign languages and how to integrate in different cultures. Barbara's presentation will be about 45 minutes long, and then there'll be an opportunity to ask any questions at the end of the session. So without further ado, I will hand over to Barbara.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to share my screen now. Oh, Tom, I'm not able to share my screen. You need to activate. No, still not possible. Well, thank you everyone for joining. Hopefully in a minute I'll be able to share my screen so I can start with my presentation. Yeah, now, thank you. Okay. I hope you can all see my screen. So welcome everybody. Today I'd like to talk about how foreign language skills make you a better leader. And as Tom already said, my name is Barbara and I am in Salzburg. I'm from Salzburg and I currently live and work in Salzburg. I teach business people at various international companies, and I do intercultural competence training. I'll give you a quick overview of the presentation. So the first part is about why should you actually learn a foreign language? And I'm going to give you 3 good reasons. And the second part is about I'm too old for that, because that's one of the sentences I get to hear all the time. The third part is about native-like competence, and we don't need to sound like native speakers. The next part then is the main part of my presentation, how foreign language skills can make you a better leader. And the last part is if you decide that you want to learn a foreign language, how do you learn a new language actually? And I'm going to talk about certain tips and tricks. So my first language is not English, so if I do make any mistakes, I hope you'll forgive me. So I want to start with a quote, and it's one of my favorite quotes. It says, every new language is like an open window that shows a new view of the world and expands your attitude towards life. It's one of my favorite quotes because it's so true. When you learn a new language, it's not just about learning the language. There is so much more that comes with this. So you learn about the culture and it really expands your attitude towards life. So why should you actually learn a foreign language? I'm going to talk about 3 good reasons. The first and very obvious is one, because the world is rapidly turning into a global village. So our globalized world, in our globalized world, learning foreign languages has become more and more important because we are all interconnected due to physical and virtual mobility, as we can see today. And for those who want to take full advantage of job, travel, or also study opportunities worldwide, foreign languages are just key skills. And so the question is now for all of those who are English native speakers is, doesn't the whole world speak English anyway? Yes, that might be true, because English serves as a lingua franca. So lingua franca means it is a language that connects people who do not share the same mother tongue. But if you only speak English, you're always dependent on the goodwill of others speaking your language. And studies have shown that especially in the world of business and in sales, so sales are more likely when consumers can get information about a product or service in their own language. So especially in the world of business, it can be really useful if you speak another language, at least to a certain extent. So learning a foreign language is always the first step to understanding culture. So learning a foreign language is truly about communicating and connecting with other people and their cultures. And once you learn a foreign language, you always learn about certain cultural norms and habits, and those are really important in order to understand, to establish trust and understanding, which again is very helpful in the world of business, because these soft skills can directly contribute to long-lasting business relationships. And this quote shows how important foreign language skills are, because Willy Brandt, the former Chancellor of Germany, once famously said, "If I'm selling to you, I speak your language, but if I'm buying, dann müssen Sie Deutsch sprechen." Then you have to speak German. This shows how important it is to speak a foreign language when you want to sell something. The next part is, "I'm too old for that." That's one of the sentences I get to hear all the time. So as soon as I start a new class with my business people, they are usually between the age 30 and 50. They either say, "I'm not good at languages," or the second sentence is always, "I'm too old for that." Yeah, that's not true, because you can become bilingual at any age. Yes, so at any age and at any point in your life, you can learn a new language. But it's stuck in people's heads that only children can learn a foreign language. And that's not true. It's just that adults learn language in a different way. Yeah. And don't forget that children have so much more time to learn, and they're so used to learning new things. And it's only in the long run that it's generally the case that children are better in the long-term proficiency. So this refers to a natural context. So if the children start learning a second language at home with the parents or with other caretakers, at the community, in the kindergarten, then yes, children are better in long-term proficiency. The reason why it is more difficult for adults to learn a second language has to do with our memory systems. So memory plays a very important role in language learning. And there are two main memory systems that are involved in language learning. That's the procedural memory system and the declarative memory system. So the procedural memory system is responsible for implicit knowledge. So knowledge that's not available to conscious awareness, and it's used automatically. Whereas the declarative memory represents explicit knowledge, and knowledge that can be recalled into conscious awareness, and it can be verbalized on demand. So the procedural memory system mediates motor and cognitive skills acquired in early childhood. And the declarative memory system is used to learn new information. So what's the problem now with these two memory systems is, so in the procedural memory system, there are stored action processes such as riding a bike or swimming. And even if you haven't practiced riding a bike for many years, you always be able to ride a bike, yeah, because it's stored in the procedural memory system. Whereas facts and information that's stored in the declarative memory system is not always, you're not always to verbalize that, because it can happen that this information cannot be recalled on demand. So the difference now between children and adults is that the first language of a child and also the second language, when a child learns a second language, is usually acquired informally in a neutral setting, and that's then stored in the procedural memory system. So similar to motor skills, which are acquired early in life, the first language becomes implicit knowledge. So when a child learns the grammar of a language, it's stored in a procedural memory system, and the child will always know, for example, how to use the past tense of a language or the plural marker of a language without actively thinking about it. So for children, learning the grammar of a language is like learning how to ride a bike. And the difference with adults, and when children learn, for example, vocabulary, they usually store it in the declarative memory system. The difference is now adults, when they learn a foreign language, they store all the information in the declarative memory system. So that's the problem, which means it cannot always be verbalized on demand. It's a typical situation when you're like, oh, I know that word, it's on the tip of my tongue, but I just can't remember it. But that doesn't mean that adults are not able to learn a new language. It just means it's going to be more difficult for them. The only area where age really does play a crucial role is when we talk about accents. Yeah, when it comes to having an accent in a foreign language, age does play a crucial role, because there's something that's called the critical period hypothesis, and it was first introduced by a German linguist called Eric Lenneberg. And the term critical period usually is used in biology, and it refers to the early stages of an organism's life, during which a particular capacity or behavior must be acquired in order to acquire it at all. Typical example would be the following behavior of ducklings, or when songbirds learn how to sing. And first language acquisition only occurs during a certain period of time. And after this critical period, language learning is rarely successful. So what does that have to do now with learning a foreign language? It has to do with it after the age of 6, when children or adults or teenagers learn a language after the age of 6, it's generally very difficult for them to reach native-like accent and a native-like lexicon. Yeah, that's the reason why most adult language learners will have a foreign accent. Yeah, it doesn't mean you cannot learn a new language. It just means you'll have a foreign accent. But as Amy Chua says, do you know what a foreign accent is? It's a sign of bravery. And I totally agree, because it takes a lot of courage to learn a foreign language and then use that foreign language. Okay, now let's get to the main part of this presentation. It's how foreign language skills make you a better leader. Because learning a foreign language enhances communication skills, cross-cultural understanding, cognitive and social flexibility, and the decision making. So let's start with the communication skills. So communication is not only about what people say, but it's also about how people say it. And as a global leader, that's very important to understand. It's the difference in communication styles between cultures, especially when you have an international team or when you're dealing with global business partners. You need to understand the different communication styles between the cultures, because intercultural understanding also reduces ambiguity. Yeah, you avoid misunderstandings. I'd like to give you an example here. So communication across cultures, when we talk about the example of negative feedback, yeah, in the DACH region is Austria, Germany, Switzerland, people tend to give direct negative feedback, and negative feedback is provided very frankly, very honestly. You can say so right in your face. So it's not always softened by positive feedback. Whereas in the UK and US, people tend to give indirect negative feedback. And negative feedback tends to be provided softly and more subtle. And usually there is a positive message wrapped around the negative message. Yeah, so we have the typical sandwich feedback. So positive, negative, positive. That's not always going to happen in the DACH region. And if you know that, then it's fine. So it's important that we understand these differences and then just accept them without judging. There is no right or wrong. It's just different. And I always get to hear that in my classes is, oh, people are so direct. Yes, but once you know that, and it has nothing to do with being rude, it's just a different style of communication. So I give you some examples because I do teach lots of British people. And there is very often a lot of misunderstanding. So I give you an example of what British say, what British mean, and what Austrian understand. So what the British say is, I would suggest. What the British mean is, this is an order. But what the Austrian understand is, it's a suggestion. Yeah, I can do whatever I want. If I think that's fine, I leave it like that. If not, yeah, it's up to me. It's just a suggestion. Another example would be what the British say is, oh, by the way. Yeah, but what the British mean is the following message is very important. But what the Austrian understand is the following message is not very important. It's just a by the way statement, so I don't really need to listen. It's not that important. And the last one is, and the last example is what the British say is, it's probably my fault. What the British mean, it's your fault. But what the Austrian understand, it's definitely his or her fault. I've got nothing to do with that. If you know these differences, then you can avoid lots of misunderstanding and maybe even frustration. So learning another language is a first step towards understanding culture. Yeah, that's maybe even the most important part of learning a foreign language. And there is a rising need for leaders who have these kind of skills, because global leaders need to manage international teams and they deal with international global business partners. So once we learn a language, we learn about the culture, and that helps us to get away from an ethnocentric view. Ethnocentric view means, okay, this is my culture and this is how we do it in my culture, or this is how we say it in my language, and that's the norm. Everything else is wrong or not the right way to do it. So I often hear when I tell them about German sentence structures, for example, oh, they say it the wrong way round. And it's not, why is it the wrong way round? Compared to English, it's just a different way, yes? And if we understand different cultures, and if the more languages we learn, the more it helps us to see things from different perspectives and also develop cultural empathy. There is a nice quote by Muhammad Ali that shows us how important it is to see things from a different perspective. And he said, looking at life from a different perspective makes you realize that it's not the deer that is crossing the road, rather it's the road that is crossing the forest. And that shows how important it is sometimes to look at things from different perspectives. Another example, for example, would be, I give you here 4 situations and 2 different perspectives. So somebody's 6 minutes late for a meeting. One perspective is, oh, still on time. I'm still on time. The other perspectives means you were late and the meeting is already over. I gave you this example because one of my students had to learn that the hard way, because he came to a meeting, he was happy that he was the first one there. He was 6 minutes late. He thought that was fine. Only when he got an angry text, he realized that the meeting was already over and he missed a very important meeting. Another situation is, sorry, I'm late. Yeah, so again, when you're late for a meeting, you apologize, sorry, I'm late. So one perspective is, yeah, you apologize, so it's fine. The other perspective is, oh, you're very rude because you need to tell me the reason. Why did you keep me waiting? I want to know why. Give me a reason. Another typical situation is asking how you are. Hi, how are you? Yeah. For some people, it might be, that's just a friendly greeting. Whereas for other people, oh, this person really wants to know how I feel. So I can tell him or her that my granny is at hospital and that I'm really lonely at the moment. So very different perspectives. Another one is typical in the world of business. I worked until 10 p.m. last night. Some people might say, oh, wow, you're very hardworking and you're very ambitious. Whereas other people say, you have very poor time management because what did you do during the day? Or the second scenario might be, oh, poor you, you have no private life. Another very typical example is personal space, yeah? And I think this little comic shows very well how different personal space is in different cultures. And again, Austria, Germany, people in Austria and Germany need less personal space than in other cultures. And if you know that, then it's fine and you can accept it. But if you don't know that, it can lead to many misunderstandings. Okay, Another part that comes with learning a language is cognitive flexibility. So what does that mean? So bilinguals and multilinguals, they constantly need to alternate between two languages in their everyday lives. Yeah? They constantly need to switch from one language to another. And so foreign language skills enhance the ability to change what you're thinking about, how you're thinking about it, and even what you're thinking about it. And it helps you to multitask. So bilinguals tend to be better at switching between multiple tasks, or even think about it at the same time. Also, it means that means to be able to analyze a situation and come up with alternative plans to achieve your goals. With cognitive flexibility also comes social flexibility. And social flexibility is the ability to switch between social environments and be better in reading social cues in this environment, which is also a very useful skill when you're a global leader. So because you then are able to quickly adapt to new situation, and that also increases resilience to stress. And it also means the ability to understand and attribute the mental states of others. So there are studies that people who speak multiple languages tend to have more empathy. Another important fact is foreign languages influence the decision-making process, yeah? And this is useful to know in the world of advertising, for example, or when you want to sell something to people, because bilinguals tend to make more logical and rational decisions when using the foreign language. So there is something called the emotional language effects. When you want to sell something and you want to reach the target group on an emotional level, you need to know that a foreign language feels less emotional than the mother tongue. So that's, for example, comes to taboo words. I could say really bad swear words in English and it doesn't bother me that much. Whereas in German, I hardly ever swear because there are certain words I just couldn't say because it has to do with an emotional effect. Or I love you, yeah? I love you in the first language feels differently than I love you in the second or third language. So this is very important when it comes to persuasive messages in advertising. One typical example would be, we all know the McDonald's slogan, "I'm loving it." And for a very long time, they used "I'm loving it" in the German-speaking countries. So in the DACH region, they used "I'm loving it." But then they changed it to "Ich liebe es," which is the German "I'm loving it," because it reaches people on a different emotional level. Because bilinguals tend to be more analytical and less emotional when they're making decisions in a foreign language. And that's important to know. Okay, so let's say you all decided that you want to learn a foreign language now. So how do you learn a foreign language? And I got some tips and tricks for you. One of the important ones is, and that might sound obvious to you, but people tend to forget it. You're not at school anymore. That's a very important point. And I've got successful business people sitting in front of me, and all of a sudden they behave like school children. The first thing they've got in their head is, "Oh, I'm not good at languages." So we all made maybe bad experiences. We all had bad experiences at school. But you're not at school anymore when you learn a language as an adult. You might get grades, but it doesn't need to bother you anymore. You won't fail the course. And you can just learn the language because you want to learn the language, not because you have to graduate. You're already an adult, you're already successful, you already have a job. And that leads me to my second one. Find your motivation. It is so important that you need to find your motivation. And believe it or not, moving to another country, so moving to Austria or Germany or any other country, is not enough in order to really just want to learn the language. You need to find your motivation, whether it's because you really want to know more about the culture, you want to be able to talk to your colleagues, or you probably have a new partner. Find your motivation. It's also important because there is something that's called the effective filter hypothesis. So the effective filter is something that keeps us from learning the language. So when the effective filter is very high, for example, that can be because you're scared. So that's a typical example why so many people at school won't learn a language properly, because maybe they're scared to get a bad grade, or maybe they're scared of the teacher. And then the effective filter is up, and then we won't be able to learn. Or the second scenario is when you are not motivated, then you won't be able to learn. The third one is extremely important. It's you need to get rid of your pride. That sounds weird, but when you learn a foreign language, you're gonna embarrass yourself, you're gonna say silly things, and you need to get over that. You need to learn to laugh about your mistakes, and you need to get rid of your pride. I've got a good example of one of my students, and a very nice manager, British manager, and I asked him what his favorite drink was, and he wanted to say it's black tea. So instead of saying Schwarztee, he said Schwanztee. And well, Schwanz translates, well, Schwanz is a male body part, so in German. So I had started laughing, I couldn't help it. I told him then he was basically ordering dick tea in every cafe in Salzburg. But he then just smiled and said, well, that explains the reaction of some waiters. Or it happened to myself that I gave a speech at the University of Brighton, and I wanted to use the word contradiction, but I used contraception instead. And I didn't even notice, only until when I looked at the faces in the audience, I realized that I said something wrong. But well, it happens to all of us. So we need to laugh about it. The next one is input is crucial. So it's not enough if you look at a German book or listen to a podcast like once every 3 weeks. Input is crucial. You need to get as much input as possible, and ideally you diversify your input. So you listen to podcasts, you read German books, you watch films on Netflix. Whatever you do, you need to get as much input as possible. And ideally, the input is always slightly above your current level, because that's how we learn. The next one is make it a routine. So as I said, it's not enough if you study German or any other language, maybe every 2 weeks. So if you make it a routine, that's the only way how you're going to be successful, because repetition is crucial. And if you repeat and repeat, then it becomes a routine, and then you don't need to think about it, and then it's just part of your everyday, of your daily life. And the last one is you need to be patient, and that's usually quite difficult for business people to be patient, because they usually want to happen everything like right now. But learning a language takes time. It might take a long time. It's not going to happen within a month. So you need to be patient with yourself, and you need to be kind to yourself. So treat yourself like you would treat someone who's learning your language. Yeah, that's very important. Otherwise, it becomes quite negative to learn the language, and it's a negative experience, and we want to avoid that. So basically what's important is time plus effort. Yes, so it will take time, and it will take a lot of effort. There are no magical tricks. So language learning just takes time. And you always need to remember that people appreciate the effort more than the accuracy. So people don't expect you to be fluent in the language straight away. They appreciate it if you go into your shop and say in their language, oh, do you speak English? So, and then you already start on a different level. And the last thing I would like to explain is, what do I actually mean when I talk about you can become bilingual at any age? Because in people's heads, usually bilingual means people that grow up bilingually, so people who learn a language from a very early age, but bilingualism exists on a continuum. So people who use the foreign language on a daily basis in their everyday life, that's those people can be called bilingual. And it's a myth that bilinguals are two monolinguals in one person. That's a myth that doesn't rarely ever exists. Okay, I feel like I was rushing through it a little bit. I apologize for that. But now we at least have more time for questions if there are any questions. So thank you everyone for listening. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me.
Barbara, thank you very much. That was absolutely fascinating. Really interesting insight. And as somebody who's worked overseas and tried to learn what is a very difficult language in my 40s, I can absolutely testify to a lot of things you said. And I think from my perspective, trying to learn the language in a country where you're working is so important in terms of you assimilating with your new colleagues, the people you're working with, but also the wider culture, so you can really enjoy the experience as much as possible. Seamus, I think you had your hand up there with a question.
No, I didn't actually have my hand up. But just a comment. Yeah, thank you very much, Barbara. That was very interesting. I speak French. My first degree was in French, and I've lived in France 3 times, and my knowledge of French comes and goes, of course. But I was very surprised that in later life, I ended up doing a lot of work in French, working for French clients. And I mean, everything you say is right and very intelligent and very perceptive. The French, forgive me my occasional weakness in French, and actually it's not the case that many of them speak better English than I do. I tend to find that it's Germans, Austrians, the Swiss, the Scandinavians who tend to speak English, the Dutch, as well as I do, often with an American accent because they've gone to some kind of US type language school. But it is true that people appreciate very genuinely if you will do your best in their language, even if it's only to make those introductory remarks or questions. I mean, one of the funny things about France and the French is that if you want them to agree with you, you do need to say it in a contradictory way. So I hope there's nobody going to get annoyed with me on this call. But for example, if you go into a large store in Paris and say, do you have something? They'll often say no. But if you go in and say, I don't suppose you've got this, have you? They'll say, si, of course we've got it. They need to disagree with you. What surprised me recently, going to Paris recently, is how many, mainly because of the millennials, younger generations, they are now speaking English, whereas the older generations in France, they still hark back to French as a language of diplomacy. And now that the UK has left the EU, I see there's been a very interesting conversation about why on earth should the EU speak the minority language of Ireland? Why don't they go back to French? So no, it's yeah, I completely agree with you. One ingratiates oneself far more significantly in another country by being able to at least attempt to speak that language. That said, I do travel a massive amount, and it's always to my astonishment, that people will pretty much always be able to lapse into English if there's no common language. And it's just absolutely astonishing. And I spend a lot of my time in the Gulf and Dubai, UAE, Bahrain, and there it's really interesting to hear people speak both languages in the same sentence. they will interact in Arabic and in English in the same sentence. It's absolutely incredible. So, okay, we've got English, makes us lazy, but it is worth thinking that to be able to learn a foreign language does lead to all of those other advantages that you've mentioned in terms of business thinking, analytical skills, and so on. So yeah, great contribution. Thank you very much, Barbara.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, James. Barbara, I have a question. I lived in Kenya where there's lots of different languages. The primary native language is Swahili. English is very widely spoken as well. But there's a huge Indian population there as well. So there's multiple Indian languages such as Gujarati, Punjabi. And like James alluded to, people can speak 2 or 3 different languages in the same sentence. How do you overcome that sort of difficulty when there's multiple languages, multiple cultures?
The difficulties of switching between languages, you mean?
Yeah.
That's actually something bilinguals or multilinguals usually do on purpose. So it's called code switching. So they do switch between, if they know that this other person uses or knows all the same languages, bilinguals very often code switch even within one sentence, because that has several reasons, because there might be just one good word in the one language, but not in the other language. So I do that with one of my English friends, and she speaks fluent German, and sometimes there are just no good English words for this particular one word. So within one sentence, we switch to the other language. So if you know that this other person knows all the other languages, that's actually very common that bilinguals do that on purpose. Or multilinguals. Okay. Yeah.
Fascinating. Barbara, that's absolutely brilliant insight into learning a language. Really appreciate it. And we'll let you go because I know how busy you are. We'll make sure that every time we visit Austria, we'll be very careful when we order our beverages, just in case. And we look forward to having you again on the PBSL sometime.
But sorry for that story, but I thought it's I need to tell that story because it's well, yeah, it's a good example.
It's fantastic. Barbara, thank you very much, and thank you everybody for attending.
Thanks very much for organising, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And if anybody has any questions, please feel free to email me.
Right. Thank you very much, Barbara.
Bye.
See you.